Hello and welcome to ATN World News. I'm Leah, and it's great to be with you, the listeners around the world. Today we have Richard Shaw, our ATN teammate, back again. And as you know, Richard Shaw has been involved with so many great films. He's quite a wonderful film producer. You can go to pinlight.com and see some of the films and documentaries he's done. And this topic on this time is an update. You're going to get the latest news on the elongated skulls. And many of you know what that is. Elongated skulls that have been found in Peru and so many other places around. Marks of some Nephilim. There's even been unborn baby, elongated skull babies found that were not born. You can't say it's head cradled for that shape. A lot of interesting things. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to Rick. And Rick, please give our audience an updated version of what's going on with the elongated skulls. I know that you just had some DNA results that came back from the experts, at a convention.
Well, thank you, Leah. For the past 5 years, I've been working with L.A. Marzulli on this phenomenon. We've been working longer than that on the Watchers series, but we started going to Peru back in 2013, I think, was our first trip, and we've done several trips since then. And we realized that probably Peru, out of all the countries in the world, have the largest collection of actual elongated skull people in their museums there. And also, there are graveyards in Peru where we could walk through and just stoop down and pick up one of these skulls. I thought it was profound. And a lot has changed since those original days when we were there. Someone has come through the Chongos Necropolis, which is this 7-mile wide graveyard where a lot of these skulls were found, and have basically plowed everything under. You could hardly find anything. You could find a few pieces of bone from a rib cage or a leg bone, something like that. But finding skulls like we once did is kind of gone. You don't really see that anymore. So I'm glad we did it when we did. But recently, LA had a man who donated quite a bit of money just so we could do DNA genetics tests. And that started us on a quest to where we needed to get samples from as many skulls as we could to send to the genetics labs. And to do that, we had to learn how to do it so that we would send samples that weren't contaminated as best we could and put them into little special containers and get those off. And so we had 3 labs doing it, 2 of them in California and 1 in Canada. And at least 50 samples were taken and sent back of elongated skulls. And what was very interesting, back on February 2nd, we did a conference in Los Angeles at the Marriott, and we basically produced this DVD. It's not real fancy production quality because it's just a conference, but on this disc it's a long disc. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes worth of the discussions from several medical doctors, an archaeologist, my experiences there, LA's experiences, Chase Klautsky, who is a forensic investigator, Mondo Gonzalez, who is an archaeologist and went through all of that stuff with us, and other people, including Dr. Malcolm Warren, who did some amazing research on determining why these skulls you can't get these kind of results through cradle head boarding. It just isn't possible. And what most people have seen, they see these heads and they go, oh, well, that's because the child was mounted to this board and they wrapped his skull, and that's how it got that way. Well, that doesn't always explain uh, how these skulls got to such an elongated uh, size so early in the child's life. And plus, that also doesn't explain certain anomalies that occur at the bottom of the skull when you turn them upside down and you look at the bottom of the skull where the foramen magnum is. The foramen magnum is a hole. It's an opening in the skull where the spinal cord from the spinal column comes up and extends and connects to the brain. And when these skulls were really elongated and huge, then the foramen magnum was moved to the occipital area of the head, way back towards the back, almost so that the opening, the foramen magnum's opening on an elongated head was almost like at the very back of the skull, which to me was a little shocking because that meant that the spinal cord and those nerves were almost like rubbing on the inside of the skull because it wasn't situated in the same way as a normal human skull. Human skull has an opening right in the middle. If you turn a human skull upside down, there is like an oval opening. It's ovular. And that allows us to move our head up and down and rotate our head and everything. And there's no pinching of the nerves or anything like that. But it's not that way on the majority of the elongated heads. They're all towards the back of the head, and also they're almost totally round. Instead of being oval, they're round. So you can't do that through cradle headboarding because some of the doctors said that if you tried to move the position of the foramen magnum after someone was already alive, it would kill the patient.
Rick, why don't you go ahead and show people one of the baby skulls you have there?
Well, one of the things that we got to do, and maybe you've seen this before, but this is an actual casting, 1-to-1 scale, actual size, of an 18-month-old child that we got permission to unwrap in Peru. And you can see, like, his little face is about this much, and the rest is all his head. And normally it takes, to really do cradle headboarding, it takes 2.5 to 3 years to really accomplish something of this size. And also, you would also have indentations where the boards and the ropes that they used to extend the skull would bite into the bone. In this case, this is just the way the child was born. And it's, we've seen so many of these now, none of this surprises us. So when we did our DNA samples, we would examine the skulls first, and now even I can pick up a skull and go, oh, this one's cradle headboarded. Oh, this one looks like it might be natural. This one's most likely cradle headboarded, because sometimes what they would do in cradle headboarding, they would try to make interesting shapes of the head. I know this sounds really perverse, but they would put ropes around the top so you'd get this extra brow ridge. So it would be an indentation, and then the head would go up even further. They would squeeze it and try to be decorative in the way that they were shaping the infant's skull. And so that's readily apparent. That's very easy to tell, oh, this is definitely cradle headboarded. And then, other times they didn't do that, but you can see the result of being pressed into a shape over a period of time, whereas the natural skulls don't seem to have that same evidence. I mean, in this case, this skull is basically from an 18 to 24-month-old child. There wasn't time to develop this enormous cranial area. And also, in tests that we've done, we've discovered that the elongated heads had 25 to 30% greater interior cranial mass than a normal human would have. So I'm not saying these are alien beings or anything like that. That's the first thing that pops into people's heads. But I do believe that they are hybrids. They're human hybrids that have mated with some other form of a sort of human creature, and they've ended up with these super big heads. And what's also interesting was there was a man in and I will send you this picture since it'll take me a minute to find it, Leah. But if you want to edit this into the show later, because it's also on this disc, the DNA results, because I thought it was so profound. But there's a man right now walking around with an elongated head that lives in Nazca, Peru. And someone took a picture of him. He's wearing a plaid shirt and he has this head that goes way up. And I've always been really intrigued by that. So there seems to be a strain of these people that are still alive. And in some of the tests that we've done in carbon dating, one of the largest heads that we were able to take tests from, the carbon dating proved that this particular individual had lived only 850 years ago. Isn't that incredible?
The timing, really is. And I usually direct my audience to Genesis 6. My personal opinion, and my audience has heard my personal opinion, is that it's a hybrid from the fallen angels who went into the human women. Genesis 6 gives an account of that. And they had a weird off-breed. And
Well, yeah.
that's my personal opinion.
I mean,
Everybody has their own. That's mine. Go ahead.
it could be because we just don't know. There's a lot of things that we don't know where this strain of DNA came from. What's interesting, as further proof, is that the vast majority of the haplogroups for the DNA testing for all of these skulls was all mitochondria DNA. The DNA was so degraded that we couldn't pull nuclear DNA, which is of the father. It just wouldn't come out. The only way we could get nuclear DNA from elongated skull is if we had a huge quantity of samples from that one skull, so they could really do some testing. And we're attempting. I know LA is attempting to do that now. To use there, I think he's working on that particularly now to try to get more samples to the lab. But that would be really something. But the majority of the haplogroups tested ended up that the birthplace or the origin of this particular strain of elongated skull people came from the Middle East. Some from Turkey, some from the Levant, Israel and the surrounding area, some from the Fertile Crescent area like Iran and Iraq. And that basically fits the biblical narrative for the Nephilim. But what we aren't saying is that these are giants, because they're not. Most of them that we have seen so far, where we can actually find the bones, the skeletal remains of their bodies, they're pretty much normal size. They're not like super tall or anything. But that does not mean that there aren't examples that are really tall. And when LA went to Catalina Island, and the two of us went there together, and then I went alone to take some more pictures. But he found there was an excavation done there in the early 20th century where they found an 8.5-foot skeletal remains. And some of the remains that they found, Ralph Glidden was the archaeologist that found this, had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And they were big, but they didn't necessarily have the same type of elongated heads that we've seen in Peru. So there seems to be more than one type of giant available. It's really quite fascinating, actually. And I know this seems rather morbid, talking about remains of giants and of elongated head people, but this is not a myth. I'm not, trying to deceive anybody or do this for any other reason other than just to tell you what we've discovered, what we've lived with for the past few years here, and it's a real phenomenon. I mean, it's really quite incredible. At pinlight.com, there's an 8-minute video that you can just watch that is kind of a summary for the uninitiated, for people that haven't really studied this phenomenon or know anything about it. That will give you like a little primer on what it is, and it's really fascinating. And also, one of the largest elongated skulls in the world is in that video. And she actually took it out of the case so I could film it, which was really quite an honor to get to look at this thing up close. And we asked her to tumble it upside down so we could see the foramen magnum and all of that. And it's just unbelievable. They call it the Chongo skull because it was found in the Chongo's graveyard, where most of the royalty, they believe royalty, was buried.
Well, Rick is giving us the latest. These are the reports that have come in from the expert team. There was a whole team of them in all different divisions, and this is what they found from the powder that was taken out from inside the skull. Now, Rick also mentioned to me something about China is showing an interest in this. Rick, you want to speak about that?
Well, China is interested in the paranormal now, and some of my Chinese friends that I know here in Los Angeles are really intrigued with the whole UFO phenomenon and wish they had more UFO examples in China. And I said, what are you talking about? A couple of years ago, there was a UFO, and nobody reports this stuff. I mean, our news is so worthless here in the States anymore. I feel like we're in Russia almost. But there was a UFO that hung over the Beijing airport for over 2 hours, and they had to close the airport because they couldn't land their planes. It was blocking the path of the runway for the planes to land. I mean, that's a real physical manifestation of something that actually happened not too long ago. But they were hoping to have even more, than that. I mean, this is like, and Leah, you probably noticed that our government is starting to trickle out information about UFOs, and yet they don't ever say in these any of these news articles that some of these UFO sightings are ours, and others are most likely interdimensional, because they'll be flying along in a straight line and just poof, they just disappear. Okay? They've popped into another dimension, or they've cranked up their anti-gravitational equipment so that basically you can't see it anymore. That could be another explanation for it. But they have this technology, and it's peppered with a spiritual potency. And the two are connected. The technology and the spiritual aspects are all part of the whole UFO phenomenon. Most people don't understand that.
One point I want to bring up, since you're talking about the spiritual connection with the technology. I mean, my audience knows I feel it's Nephilims or demons with a strong delusion. That's my opinion. Period. These UFOs are just setting it up for the end times. But to get on the technology and the spiritual coming into the technology, there are all these new videos now where they show Alexia giggling demonically when asked certain questions, like it's not pre-programmed to do that, but it's been caught doing it. And there's a new AI, and we're talking about the image, of the beast. And
that's pretty weird. I saw that myself.
The new things that is coming out, and this is what I'm reading in the news. They say, could a demon spirit actually enter technology for the end times? What do you think, Rick?
Well, I think that we're not quite there yet, as far as, I mean, at least as far as what we, the public, the John Q. Public bunch, are privy to. I'm sure they're working on that technology, in black ops projects. We're we're 10, 20, 30 years behind what really has been discovered. I'm pretty much convinced of that. I mean, when you talk to Siri on your iPhone, they have all of these pre-programmed strings of answers. And there's it's fun because sometimes I play with Siri. I said, so Siri, what are you wearing today? you know to see if they have an answer programmed into the system to it. And I say, well, thank you, Siri, and she'll come back and she'll say, my mission is to serve. So Siri is becoming more personable all the time. On If you have an iPhone, you know what I'm talking about. So this whole deal with Amazon and their setup, I'm sure, is programmed the same way. It understands language enough to know, okay, I need to have an answer for that. And a great example of that, you've seen the original Terminator movie, right? Where and my friend Bob, oh, there's this. I have to tell you about this because it just cracks me up every time I think of it. There's this part where the Terminator's eye gets damaged, and anyone that's seen this movie knows what I'm talking about. He goes into the bathroom and he pulls this thing out of his eye, and blood's coming out and everything like that. And he's fixing his eye, and it was actually my friend Bob that was doing all of that. They had a dummy head of Arnold Schwarzenegger with these fake eyes, and my friend Bob's hand was up in that head making it move. But there was a guy in the hallway while all this is going on, and saying, what are you doing in there? It stinks. Or, I mean, he did something. Some guy, some landlord of the area. And so the Terminator had to come up with an answer really quick. So on his internal screen, there's all these projected answers of what he could say to this guy. And he goes, shut up, basically, expletive, which I won't say. But it was very typical of what someone would say like that to this guy. So it was basically just a computer string that was programmed into the Terminator's memory to know how to respond to human voice. And that's, I think, the same way that these things work. They have pre-programmed strings of information, and they have digital audio of this person that's been digitized, and they just put it together in a string, and that's really what's happening. So there's no demonic entity in these devices yet, but I think we're getting to the point where, just like what you see in science fiction movies where they say the computer is now self-aware, it knows it's a thinking being, and it can start to think on its own. At that point, then I don't know what could happen. It's a very interesting question, an interesting idea. I was on Jimmy Church's show kind of recently, and he started asking me about, well, people are talking about wanting to transfer all of their memories into an android so they can live forever. What do you think about that? And, well, obviously, I had to think about a really intelligent answer for that, because I wasn't ready to really answer that kind of a question. But after thinking about it, you probably could use brainwaves to transfer your memories into a computer, but that would not mean that it's transferring your soul. It would be transferring your thoughts and your experiences into a machine. So that is not you. The only person that's in charge of that is God. So essentially, it would be like copying your data from your head into another place and leaving it also in your head. That's the only way that I think that can happen.
I want to warn my audience that this is ever offered to you in the future. Don't do it. That's
no,
as bad
don't
as
do it.
that's as bad as taking a chip. Honestly, people, steer clear from this stuff. I'm sure Rick agrees.
Oh yeah, you don't want. I mean, I think what they're trying to do to us is through chemicals and plastics and aerial spraying that they're doing. That anyone that's actually aware of what's going on around them know that there's chemicals being sprayed in our skies. This has been proven scientifically, taken to labs and tested. We know what the elements are. It's aluminum, barium, and other substances, including possibly some active bacteria that they're spraying into the skies. All that has been tested. So I'm not saying this just based on I think this is happening. This is really happening. So we think they're trying to change life on Earth into some other format, some way that is not reproducing or unable to reproduce. People's sperm counts are lower, this type of thing. Through chemicals, it can also change a heterosexual person into a homosexual person. We know that has happened in laboratory animals, and that they're trying to do that to quell the population on the planet. So all of these things are really dastardly that's happening right now, and it's all this whole. It's beyond deep state. I think it's has to do with our intelligence community and what's going on that's super secret, and we're not really told about it all. So my whole thing is that we're not supposed to be afraid, and basically we read in scripture that when these things happen, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And I think we're getting closer to the point where we will no longer be able to combat any of these threats to humanity. I mean, basically we have to breathe the air that we have, and if there's wars that break out, we may be involved in being the recipient of those things. We don't know what's going to happen within the next few years, and the only thing that I can say to people is if you're frightened about these things, or if you're scared about them, it's basically to pray to God, and if you do that, He will take care of you. And this life is not the only life. This is almost like we live in the Matrix. A lot of people think that this is a complete digital simulation that we're living in. And there seems to be evidence to that account that this may not even be real. People that have had near-death experiences often say their experiences after they were dead was more real than when they were alive. They almost always say that. And I'm actually, Leah, I'm trying to work on getting the funding together to do a major motion picture about it, but we need a whole lot of money to do it. So that's something that I don't expect to happen quick or easily, but it's something I really want to do.
Well, you've heard a lot of updates on a lot of different things going on that's current. That's the unexplained. With someone trying to explain it who's been somewhat of an expert in the field. I will say, because some of my followers will say, what about those videos where Alexia goes off at 2 a.m. on her own, laughing like a witch? Yeah, there's a problem with that. I don't know if it's a company trying to freak you out in a psyop or what's going on, but
I think it's probably the programmers putting an Easter egg in the programming.
Oh my God.
Basically,
but
let's freak everybody out.
At some point in time, there is going to be an image of the beast, and that's just to be seen. But
Very
listen,
close to that, I think.
Yeah, listen, I encourage you to stay close to Jesus, and to look forward to a rapture, because I want to tell you something, people. The tribulation is not something that anyone would ever want to go through. It'll be the worst. The Bible says the worst it has ever been. So we are to be prepared. We're supposed to be watching, and we're supposed to be waiting. And I'd like to thank our guest, Richard, for being with us. Richard, I really thank you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to share with our audience today.
Happy to do it. And I know this seems really wacky to most people, but It's really not. I mean, the stuff that's coming out now is quite amazing, and we're living in an incredible time to be alive with all of this technology, you know, where we're actually able to experience it. But just don't be fooled by it.
Oh, those are some wise words to live by. Well, Rick, always a pleasure having you on. And people, until next time, like Rick said, don't be afraid. Just remember, God loves you. See you next time. Bye.